Here we go. Here we go. We are now recording. Right, tonight's one is about communication. So I just want to bring to attention, however, that the textbook, Hartley, has done a really good job on a lot of the things that you're going to need for your assessments in communication. And from about 270 something, let me just see, somewhere around 270. I'll just check that out. Make it 271. He has really outlined it very well, the communication ones. So I highly recommend that you look at that for this one. This is really the soft side of project management, and but it is communication is absolutely critical from a project perspective, because 90% of a project manager's job is actually communicating. So what are these issues that we need to talk about? Well, communications management is there to ensure that everybody gets the right message at the right time. That's the whole idea of communications. Putting in a communication strategy, putting in a communications plan, if you like, is really to ensure that everybody gets the right message at the right time. So that's what's critical for our for running a project. And just one more, just a couple more comments that I think I'd like to just make, and that effective management of project communications is critical to a project success. And the most common reason for projects faltering or failing is in fact poor communication. And it's communication between the team, it's within the team, and it's with the stakeholders, and it's including the project sponsor. And strangely enough, it's the project sponsor that often gets left out of this whole thing, and he's the most important. In fact, if you're the project manager, your sponsor, if you really want to get good communication, it's to have a good relationship and a good communication with your sponsor. He will actually take care of most of the other communication with other stakeholders, especially negative stakeholders, if you are in a good relationship with your sponsor. So in other words, your communication with your sponsor is good. You're going to find that your sponsor will in fact take care of most of the stakeholders. I'm not saying that you need to neglect the stakeholders, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that that assistance will be there. Remember that communication is a two-way process. The purpose of that communication is to connect with people. Only effective if there's a connection made between it, right? So it's really critical. Communication is critical. So let's look at some of these components of this of project communication. And here are some of the things that you can measure against. Here's some criteria, critical success criteria for communications. The first one is that a message must be conveyed and it must be received. Okay, so if a message is not conveyed, nothing's happened. There's been no communication. If it hasn't been received, it hasn't. All right. So it always reminds me of when I was doing protocols and developing protocols, electronic protocols on the internet and all sorts of different protocols. Always remember that we used to have, it was actually important in some of them, on a local area network, we didn't worry about the things that you do in a wide area network. Okay. In a wide area network, you want to make sure that you send an acknowledgement back, or a negative acknowledgement. If there's too much distortion or noise, you want to send back and say, hey, I didn't get the message. And that can actually happen even with our verbal things, when we take from what's in the thoughts and the minds to changing it into a language and communicating that through speech or language, and the other person picks it up. There's still so many things that can go wrong. So that's absolutely critical, that we look at what the message was conveyed and received. Now the next thing is that there was a response to that message. that message isn't really communicated unless you've got a response back, because you don't know what's happened to that message. It's gone into the ether, if you like. It's just gone somewhere and you don't know what's happened to it. So a response to the message is critical. All right, so always look for a response. Now, this is also important. Both the sender and the receiver of the message had the same understanding. All right, so these are the critical criteria: that the message was conveyed and it was received, that there was a response for the message, and that both the sender and the receiver of the message had the same understanding. All right, I said earlier this evening that Senji has got an inference ladder that he goes through. And really, at the top of the ladder, it's about your own values and your own grid, and that can actually distort the message. So as you're taking this in, you receive that message in your ears, you start converting it, and you take those facts and you're converting it into something that you can interpret, something that will make sense to you, and in that translation, you're going to get distortion, and you might not come out with the same understanding as what the sender expects. So as a receiver, you should actually check that with the sender. Although it's always the sender that does it. It sounds simple, but a common cause of project failure is poor communication. All right, let's have a look at some other things here. We're going to look at sender-receiver models. We're going to look at a few choice of media, writing style, presentation techniques, and meeting management. Now, most of that is covered very nicely within Hartley's book, so I'm not going to cover too much of that tonight, but I'd like you to look at those aspects of it, because that's what the aspects are that we're going to be covering when we look at your assessment. All right, now here's the basics of communication. And it's strange, but even though we could put it in electronic format or whatever it is, these are the things they're going to have. So the first one is to encode something. What we mean by that is that we need to translate our thoughts and ideas into a language that is understood by others. That's as simple as that. So when we're encoding a message, what we're taking is our thoughts and our ideas, we convert it into a language that others can understand. It's not good converting it into a language that nobody can understand. Right? The second one is a message. That is the output of the encoding. In other words, what comes out of our mouth is the encoding. And the medium is either the air that transmits it to the other person's ears, or it's an electronic method. It's an optic fiber or copper or satellite or whatever. Electronic means could also be a medium. Paper is a medium. All right? Paper is a medium. Faxes are a medium. So those are mediums to actually get through there. And then noise is any interference that gets in the way of understanding the message. So it's any interference that gets in the way of understanding that message. Right? And that could be a lot of things. Okay? It could be somebody else distorting the message. It could be you're trying to talk through a vacuum. It could be that something breaks down. Okay, but noise is going to interfere with the transmission of that message. And then to decode it means to translate that message back into meaningful thoughts and ideas. Now, the reason why I've spent a long time on this one and taking you through this is because it's good for your assessment. It gives you background knowledge for your assessment, and so I'm going to look for this type of thing in your assessments. But more importantly, if you wrote the PMP exam, they ask a lot of questions around this issue, because they really want you to understand how important it is. Now let me just take it to one more level, and this is what we call lines of communication. Now there's six people in this communication here. So what I'm going to ask you now is, if we had 6 people in a room or 6 people in a project team, how many lines of communication would we have? Now there's a formula that they give us here. All right, so you see there's a line of communication. Whoops. I've got it there. There's a line of communication. There's a line of communication. There's a line of communication. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of communication just from one to somebody else. Right? So how do we calculate that? Well, we calculate it with this formula. So N is the number of people times the number of people minus 1 and divided by 2. So how many lines of communication are there with 6 people? Come on, just quickly type it out. Tell me how many lines of communication are there. taking that formula into consideration. You should be able to do this mentally. So you could quickly just tell me how many lines of communication. I'm going to ask you to increase it by 1 anyway, and then we're going to see what happens when we increase it by 1, and then by 2, and then by 3. And we'll see we're going to have dramatic results. So I'd really like you to quickly just tell me how many is it? Is it 15? Is it 20? 25? If we take that, how many would be there? How many lines of communication? Yep. Okay, we got 15, and I agree with you. Now, if we increase that to 7 people in here, how many would it be? 21. So let's increase it to 8. How many would it be? 28. So you see how quickly it goes up. With adding 2, we had 15. So to add 2 people into this, suddenly we got 8. Now this is the problem. We have a geometric progression, right? All right. So it gets more every time we add 1 person to it. Now, that's why in a project team, it's really good not to exceed 13 or 14 people in the project team, because the lines of communication in the project team become really difficult to manage. So if you're managing a lot of people, try and build sub-teams, right? Build some smaller teams, because the communication within the project team is critical. Okay, so we're going to look at that. So there's a formula to work out what they would. The reason why we spend a bit of time on that one is another reason why if you go for PMR certification, you're going to get an issue there. So let's look at now the project life cycle. And there, those process groups. Communication has its most impact on the planning and the monitoring and control. But there is a communication still, even though it might be one way, in closing as well. But it really is the same thing as information distribution and managing stakeholders. But managing stakeholders comes right up in the monitoring and the control. So let's look at some of these processes. Let's try and get some understanding of them. Now, unfortunately, it's going to have to be brief tonight, but I just want you to get a feeling for it so that you can actually look and see how important communication is. So here we go again. If we look at that one, so we're saying the communication process, all right, or the communication plan is part of the project management plan. Right? So you're going to have a communication plan, you're going to have a quality plan, you're going to have a cost budget, or a costing plan, you're going to have a schedule. All of these form part of your project management plan. Right? So now this plan is there so that you can figure out where you figure out who needs to know what when. All right, and you're going to see that the plan comes in there, and then you're going to see that it goes around in a circle, executing control, and then you'll do some more planning. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. So here's the cycle that takes place here. So that's critical for us, is in the planning. So this process of determining the information and the communication needs of the project stakeholders is really communication planning. So this process is communication. What level of interest and influence each of the project has on there, it needs to be analyzed and assessed while you're doing this plan. You need to assess who needs what kind of information, and when will they need it, and how will it be given to them, written, verbally. How are we going to do this? Right now, obviously, environmental factors of the organization are going to take a big part in this thing, a very big part. The other one is the policies that you have for communication, both the internal policies and the external policies. So there will be policies in most organizations on how you can communicate. And that's often a restriction and a constraint about how you can communicate within the organization. And then the other important one is obviously your project scope, and now your project management plan. Now there's two issues here that need to be addressed right here. There are two critical aspects that you're going to have to manage from a communication perspective. One is the constraints of the project. All stakeholders, including the sponsor, and all stakeholders of them need to understand the constraints very clearly. And they also need to understand the assumptions that you've made in many of these cases. The reason is because an assumption is something that you might not have something tangible for. Then you need to have a communication plan if the risk comes and a stakeholder asks you, on what assumption did you make this, and why did you make it on this assumption, or why did you have this judgment? So you need to have a plan in place for all your constraints and all your assumptions. Now, it's always good to make those assumptions and record those assumptions and bring them out in the open, because if you're going to hide the assumptions that you make and you haven't communicated those effectively, you as a project manager are going to be in trouble. So assumptions and constraints are the two most important things, inputs that you're going to have. And in planning, there are two tools and techniques that we need to look at. The first one is a communications requirements analysis. Now, you're going to find that in Hartley, in both the human resources side and in the communication side. And that is that what you need to do is go to the stakeholders and you need to do a stakeholder analysis. And there's some good techniques in that one, but it's important to do that so that you know how to communicate with the stakeholders. And the second one, what is the communications technology that you're going to have? Now, that could be a telephone, a fax machine. It could be internet. You might do everything even via video conferencing. There might be a number of methods and technologies that you need to do, and it's up front you need to look at that. Now, if it's a very small project, then obviously you don't need someone specifically to look at the telecommunication side of it and man the phones and man the things for it. But as your project gets bigger and bigger, there is going to be a lot of communication. So you need to look at the technology that is required for that particular communication strategy. For example, let's just take Microsoft, and if it was a very large project, you'd probably have SharePoint. That's more technology. So that needs to be brought to the fore. That needs to be made, you need to expose it and make sure that your project sponsor and the stakeholders know the implications of the technology that you require to communicate effectively. So the outputs of this planning is obviously your communications management plan. So let's go on to the next one. And that is the information distribution. Information distribution. Now, information distribution is going to happen when you're executing. And because it happens while the work is being done, you need to ensure that everybody gets the information they need while they are working. So this is difficult. There's a distraction now. So there's noise in there. So when somebody else is doing something and you're trying to communicate, there's noise. So you need to know that most of your communication is going to have, there is going to be noise around, so that they are completely equipped to get the job done. That's the definition of that. Now, let's look at some of the inputs for information distribution, or the process of making the needed information available to project stakeholders in a timely manner. So the first input is obviously your communication management plan. That's your critical aspect for inputs. The next input is the oops, I went too quickly there. The tools and techniques. Sorry, I thought there was a couple more there. So here are some of the tools and techniques that you're going to use for information distribution. There's communication skills. All right, simple. All right, keep it simple. KISS. I think it's that what KISS means. Keep it simple and be informative. understand the needs of the receiver. So you need to do that stakeholder analysis so that you can understand the needs of the receiver. All right, so that's a simple communication technique. Another one is that we need to be, as project managers, effective listeners. Now, if we're directing projects and we're managing projects, often we like to hear our own voice and we don't listen to the stakeholders. All right, so this little technique that we've got here actually helps you listen to the stakeholders. So there's actually body language that's taking place here. And if you put this body language right, you will demonstrate active listening. That's what I want to show you, is this active listening. So number one, you need to appear interested. Number two, you need to make eye contact. And you need to let them know that you are interested. All right, by doing something. Nod, smile, frown. All right, you do that already with Skype and Facebook and things like that, or instant messaging when you do it. When you want to demonstrate some emotion, you're going to use the happy face or the angry face or the perplexed face or whatever. You're going to use those symbols to let it do it. So you need to do it the same way when you're having verbal communication with someone. So when you're communicating via voice, that it should also be there. And you need to recap in your own words. So if someone says something to you, recap it in your own words. In other words, listen to what it is, decode it, infuse it into your body, and then recap it so that the other person has a chance to say, that's not really what I meant. This is what I meant. All right, so to make sure that the message is not distorted, recap on your own words. And try not to interrupt. Now, I'm not so good at this. Try not to interrupt, because it often means that you're not listening. So that's what they would call active listening or effective listening. All right. Another one on the communication skill is those resolving of conflicts. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this one because I went into it in quite a lot of detail last week. And it was also in Hartley, and Hartley has done a good job on that one. Okay. Remember Tuckman's thing of conflict? Well, it is in your book, and I suggest you look at it. They are exactly the same. We've just used different words here for that, but it is there. So those are the communication skills. Now here's some techniques for gathering and for information gathering and retrieval systems. Now it's obvious you're going to have a filing system. We're still cutting down trees, and you're going to get the hard copies and things. So, but I would highly recommend that you actually scan some of those documents and put them into an electronic format. And that means that you may need a document management system. Now there are plenty around, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but a document management system allows you to make sure that you've got the right version, that you're communicating the right version, that you're actually making sure that if somebody takes it out, you can still find it. So I would duplicate that in your manual file system. Now it says electronic databases. Now one of the most important databases that you have, in fact, is your email. I'm sure that you would agree with me that email is incredibly important, and you need to file that in the right topics and folders. So you need to make a folder system that is compatible with your folder system that you would have for your organization, your corporate one. So do it in the same methodology, use the same methodology, and make sure that your emails are filed in the same way that you would have to go look for a manual file. So that's only one of the electronic databases. I'm pretty sure there will be a lot more and others to keep that documentation and make sure it's there. Now, project management software is a very important tool, because that's where you can see your dependencies, your NAT chart, your CPM, your critical path. You can see the resources that are on there and allocated to that. You can see how far they are with the progress. It's an enormously important tool for actually analyzing and actually extracting data out of to produce for your sponsor and for the stakeholders. So your project manager, utilize a project management tool or software to do that. Here's some other ones anyway. There's email, there's hard copies and newsletters, there's telephone, there's voicemail, there's video conferencing, web pages, meeting, and of course project management software. So there's lots of ways that we can distribute those that information. It's probably not a bad idea to have a content management system and a website, because that's a very easy way to go about having an interaction with people. So the internet is a really important tool for doing that. And the other one, obvious one, is meetings. And you need to run meetings effectively. Now, Hartley's got a very good guide on how you run meetings and what to put in place so that your meetings run smoothly. All right, so that's communication from an information distribution perspective. Now, don't underestimate the importance of the learning process. And lessons learned process is important because it's during the project life cycle that lessons are continually identified. So you need to update the lessons learned database. You need to input into the knowledge management system. You need to update corporate policies, processes, and procedures when you go through here. And you should always be having new and improved business skills. Okay, the product and service improvement. And there should be an update to your risk management process or plan, because you're going to change things, and it is going to change the impact of the risk management plan. So you need to tie it in with your scoping and your project communications management. Now, let's go on slightly. So what outputs would you have from information distribution? Well, it's pretty simple. It's going to go into your process documents. So you're going to have your documents in the filing. Those are the corporate ones, the ones that you want filed officially will all be there. And the other output of any distribution will be requested changes. Those requested changes more than likely are going to be written so that you can't get away from it, and they're going to ask you specific things about the project in the change request. So what comes out of the information distribution, the output is actually requested changes, which you're going to have to deal with as a project manager and with your sponsor. All right, so here's the life cycle. Okay, we're looking at planning, we're looking at control, we're looking at performance reporting. So this is where you turn all that work performance information into reports that your stakeholders will use to stay informed. That's what it's about. So what about performance reporting? Well, here's some inputs for that. You're going to have a work performance information. You're going to have performance measures. You're going to have forecasted completions. You're going to have quality control issues. You're going to have project management and performance measurements as part of the baseline. And then you're going to look for approved change requests, and you're going to look at the deliverables. Okay, so it's critical for you to give your family an important area that they can actually use. So let's look at some of the performance reporting, the tools and techniques. Okay, here's some of the tools and techniques. And the first one is software such as table reporting, spreadsheet analysis, presentations, graphics. And you can use a lot to illustrate your project performance data. It's much better to use spreadsheet analysis and graphics to actually demonstrate your performance. So I highly recommend tools that portray it in a visual way. So performance information gathering and compilation is important. And that's where you're going to go to your manual filing systems, your electronic databases, your project management software. It should all be in there. And then the status review is in 4 areas. One, in the project team. Secondly, in the steering committee. And thirdly, in client meetings. All right. So how do we keep these things similar and make sure that we're saying the same thing to different stakeholders? All right. So we need to be consistent in our communication. So that's why we've broken this up. Now remember, you're going to speak differently in the steering committee meetings as you are in client meetings, as you are in project team meetings. All right, so reporting it, we need to be aware of who we're reporting it to. Then finally we come to, well, not quite finally, but we come to time reporting. Now that's the timesheet system. All right, so you will have that if you install some of Microsoft's extended features. you will be able to use the timesheets, and you'll be able to update those project plans that you've made. And that's a very, very important tool. Okay, you can get a lot of information out of there, and you can actually help. It'll actually help you in managing the project, because remember, 90% of a project management's time is taken up in communicating. So this process of collecting and distributing performance information is that you want to report on the progress and a measurement and forecasting. So the first thing is, let's look at the presentation tools. Well, it's your corporate accounting system, it's your project management software. It's also your status review meetings, your time reporting, your cost reporting. So all of those are there. And your outputs are really your performance reports, your forecasts, your requested changes, your recommended corrective actions, and your organizational process assets. So that must be in part of your reporting. Now, let's look at something to watch out. And we need to watch out for communication problems and make sure all of our stakeholders get the right information to help them make good decisions. So this whole thing here is to make sure that the stakeholders are getting the right information. So let's look at some of that. Managing the stakeholders. Well, obviously, you need to have a stakeholder analysis, but it should be documented in your management plan, your communications management plan. And the other one is going to be documented in the organizational and filed away in the organizational process assets. Okay, so the process of managing communications to satisfy the requirements and resolve issues with the project stakeholders, there's two things that you're going to have. Okay, part in the communications plan, and second of all, it's locked away and safe. All right, so let's go to the next part. So what tools and methods do we have? Well, the first one are the communication methods, such as communication management plan. They're utilized for the stakeholder management. There's face-to-face and the most effective use of resolution. So communication methods are really important. The other one are the issue logs, because that keeps little pieces of what was done on the trips, and it makes a very good lessons learned. Okay, so now we're looking at issue logs. All right. Now that's another tool that's really, really important, is to write down and to make sure that you've recorded any issue in a log, because you're going to use that to go back to. So if someone has raised an issue with you, you can use that log for monitoring and to resolve issues later. Now, the output of managing this are resolved issues, there are approved change requests, there's approved corrective action, and obviously you're going to update your organizational process assets and your project management plan. So, we've come to the end tonight, except that this is a communication plan, an example of a communication plan for stakeholders. And then you're going to see who it is, or the stakeholder, the project sponsor, the project team members, and other members are down the side. What are you communicating? Well, to the project sponsor, you're communicating the progress, the performance progress, and any other issues that might impact on that progress. All right, you're going to do it at each milestone, and you're going to insert dates to get to those milestones. You're going to look for issues that will have an immediate and direct impact on the project as soon as it is identified for an ongoing issues. All right. Now then you're going to have a formal report in an agreed format, and the conversation or face-to-face by or by phone, and the follow-up and written notification to your project sponsor and your stakeholders. Okay, what are you going to do with your team members? Well, I'm not going to go through all of this now, but I recommend that you actually look at some of these. There is another detailed graph in Hartley. All right, so let's go on. I'm going to ask you a question now. This is one of the questions you're going to get asked fairly regularly in the PMP exam. So let me ask you a question now. You ask one of your stakeholders how things are going on her part of the project, and she says they're going fine in a very sarcastic tone. Okay, so which is the best way to describe that kind of communication that you used? Come on, A, B, or C, or D? At least I can get your fingers working a little bit here. Come on, tell me which is the answer to this question? Feedback, active listening, nonverbal, paralingual. What is the answer to this one? You ask one of your stakeholders how things are going on her part of the project, and she says things are fine, but in a sarcastic tone. Okay, which is the best way to describe that kind of communication that you used? C. Thank you, Warren. It's a good answer. But let's see if it's really the right one. Auntie says A. Okay, it's possible. I still don't think it's the best answer. Anybody else got another one? Okay, it is in fact D. All right. When someone is using an inflection, pitch, tone, amplification of voice, if you like, then they are using added things for their communication. So it is called paralingual. In other words, it goes on the side of your linguistics. Okay, so it's actually parallel to that one. So the tone and inflection can actually mean things. You can actually get a lot from tone, and you can get a lot from inflection. All right, so it actually is a tool to help you understand when people and how they're talking to you. Okay, so if one of the stakeholders was doing their part in the project, and she says they're fine in a sarcastic tone, which means that there's a problem, isn't there? Which is the best way to describe that kind of communication that you used? Right, I would like you to keep that, because it might come in very useful for you. Okay, now I think we've come to the end. All right, there you see it's paralingual. Happens when additional information is conveyed by tone or pitch of voice. It is when you use more than just words to communicate. Now here's Dilbert about communication. When you've read that, then I'm going to say, well, we're done. Okay, anybody can tell me? All right, I'm done. Are there any questions? Any questions? Okay. And then I'm going to wish you good night then. Thank you for coming in again. Thank you for joining the webinar. I hope you all have a good night. Good night then.